What would you do if the boy who shattered your heart at 18 walked back into your life at 25, holding the one thing you built to survive without him? What would you do if the only man who ever made you feel safe turned out to be the reason you never trusted anyone again? And what would you do if, after everything, the tears, the silence, the years of pretending you were fine, his voice still made you forget how to breathe? My name is Isabel Calloway, and this is the story of the boy who left me standing in a silver dress, and the woman he came back to find 7 years too late. I used to think I'd buried that girl, the one who waited by the door in a dress the color of moonlight, checking her phone every 30 seconds, convinced he was just running late. I thought I'd become someone new, someone unshakable, acting CEO of my father's company, a woman who signed 9-figure deals before breakfast and never let her hand shake in front of anyone. And then the boardroom doors opened, and I heard his voice for the first time in 7 years. I didn't turn around right away. I couldn't, because some part of me, the part I thought I'd killed off in a torn silver dress a long time ago, already knew exactly who it was. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Okay, let's go back to where it all started. 7 years earlier. If you'd looked at my life from the outside, you'd have thought I had everything. My father's name was on buildings. My family's money was the kind that made headlines. I had a closet bigger than most people's apartments, and a car before I even had a curfew. But money doesn't fill a house, and it definitely doesn't fill the silence at our dinner table. My mother died the day I was born. I never got to know her. Not her voice, not her laugh, nothing. Just photographs, and a father who could barely look at me without something breaking behind his eyes. I used to think he blamed me. I was 17, and convinced that every time my father flinched at the sight of me, it was because I'd taken his wife away from him just by existing. The only person in that enormous, freezing house who ever made me feel like I belonged there was my stepmother, Maggie. She wasn't supposed to love me. Stepmothers in movies never do. But she did. Fiercely, loudly, in a way that almost made up for everything else. Almost. But none of that. The money, the silence, my father's cold shoulder, none of it prepared me for the boy who was about to walk into my life and rearrange everything I thought I knew about being loved. His name was Xander Beaumont, and he transferred to my school in the fall of my senior year. I want to be honest with you. I wasn't the kind of girl who believed in love at first sight. I'd grown up watching my father write checks instead of writing birthday cards. I didn't believe hearts came with warnings. I thought they just broke, eventually, no matter what you did. Xander didn't care that my last name opened doors. He looked at me the first day we met, really looked, the way no one ever had, and said, "You're the girl everyone's afraid to talk to, aren't you?" I laughed before I could stop myself. Nobody had ever said that to me. Not "you're beautiful," not "you're rich." Just true. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment the girl who never let anyone close started letting someone in. I wish, more than anything, that I had known then what that would cost me. What followed were the best months of my life. I know how that sounds now, knowing what's coming, but I need you to understand. Before I hated him, I loved him with everything I had. He showed up outside my house on my 18th birthday, the one my father forgot, holding a cake he clearly bought at a gas station and lit with a lighter because he didn't have matches. I cried, not because the cake was good, it was terrible, but because for the first time, someone remembered. Our fingers brushed over a shared locker so many times it stopped being an accident. He gave me his jacket in the rain and never asked for it back. We almost kissed once, in my kitchen, and Maggie walked in at exactly the wrong moment. We laughed about it for weeks. I fell in love with him slowly, and then all at once, the way people warn you about and you never believe until it happens to you. But there was one thing about Xander I didn't understand yet. One phone call I overheard, one flinch when someone mentioned leaving the country that I was too in love to ask about. I should have asked. Real quick, if you're the kind of person who already has a feeling about what's coming, drop a comment and tell me, do you think he left because he wanted to, or because someone made him? I'll tell you the truth soon. I promise. Prom was supposed to be the night that proved everything I'd started to believe. That maybe I wasn't unlovable. That maybe my father's coldness wasn't proof that something in me was broken. Xander picked out my dress with me. Silver, floor length, the kind of dress that catches every light in a room. He held it up against me in the store and said, "This was made for you." I believed him. I believed everything he said. I remember standing in front of my mirror that night, turning slowly, watching the silver fabric move like water. I remember thinking, for the first time in my life, that I looked like someone worth loving. He was supposed to pick me up at 7. He never came. And what I found out instead would break something in me that took 7 years to even begin to heal. I want to slow down here, because I still remember every second of this night with a kind of clarity that scares me. 7 o'clock came and went. I told myself traffic. 8 o'clock, I told myself something with his family. By 9, I was calling a number that went straight to voicemail, standing alone in a dress made of moonlight, while everyone else's dates arrived in a parade of headlights. It was a classmate, someone I barely knew, who finally told me, gently, awkwardly, like she almost didn't want to be the one to say it. Xander was gone. Not late. Gone. He'd left the country. And worse, so much worse, he was already engaged. To someone else. I didn't scream. I didn't cry, not at first. I just stood there in that dress, in that gymnasium full of golden light and slow dancing couples, and felt something inside me go completely, permanently quiet. By the time I got home that night, that silence had turned into something else entirely. And I want to tell you exactly what I did to that dress, because it's the moment I stopped being the girl who waited by the door. I stood in front of my mirror again, except this time I wasn't admiring myself. I was staring at a girl who had believed a boy when he said, "Forever," and I hated her a little. I don't remember deciding to do it. 1 second the dress was on its hanger, and the next it was in my hands, and I was tearing it. The silver fabric, he said, was made for me, ripping under my own fingers, seam by seam, until it was nothing but scraps on my bedroom floor. Maggie found me like that. She didn't say a word. She just sat down on the floor next to the wreckage of that dress and held me until I stopped shaking. That night, I made myself a promise. I would never again let a man see me shake. I would build something so solid, so undeniable, that no one could ever leave me standing in the dark again. I didn't know yet that the promise would cost me the next 7 years of my life. I want to pause here for a second, because I think a lot of you already know exactly what this feels like. Tell me in the comments, have you ever made a promise to yourself after heartbreak that ended up controlling more of your life than you meant it to? I'd really love to know I'm not the only one. Okay, let's keep going, because 7 years later, I finally had to break that promise. I want you to picture the transformation like a montage, because that's honestly how it felt living it. The girl who cried into a torn silver dress became a woman who wore tailored blazers like armor. I graduated top of my class out of pure spite. I learned everything about my father's company because I refused to be underestimated the way I'd once let myself be blindsided. When my father got sick, his heart, the doctors said, though I sometimes think it was just 17 years of grief finally catching up with him, I stepped in as acting CEO. I was 24. Most people whispered that I wouldn't last a year. I lasted. I thrived, actually. I turned down more marriage proposals than I could count, not out of arrogance, but because none of them made me feel the way one reckless 18-year-old boy once had. I told myself I didn't need that feeling. I told myself a lot of things. What I didn't know was that my company was about to sign a merger deal with someone who would undo every wall I'd spent 7 years building. Before I tell you about him walking back into my life, I need to introduce you to someone else, a man named Sebastian Cross. Sebastian was smart, charming, and dangerous in the particular way that only powerful men who've never been told no can be. He wanted this merger to happen, but not for the reasons everyone thought. He wanted it to fail in exactly the right way, at exactly the right moment, so he could pick up the pieces of both companies for himself. I trusted him, at first. That's what makes what happens later so hard to talk about. But Sebastian wasn't the storm I needed to worry about that day, because 30 seconds later, the boardroom doors opened, and the storm I actually needed to worry about walked in wearing a suit that fit him like he'd been born into money he hadn't had at 17. This is where we started, my trembling hand, my name being called, his voice, the same voice that once whispered, "This was made for you," over a silver dress, now saying my name across a conference table like it was just business. I didn't let myself react. 7 years of training kept my face perfectly, professionally still. But underneath the table, my hands would not stop shaking. He looked at me the way he used to, like I was the only person in the room. I hated how much that still worked on me. "Isabel," he said, not Bella. Nobody had called me Isabel since him. I opened my mouth to say something cold, something cutting, something that would remind us both that I wasn't 18 anymore. What came out instead surprised even me. "Okay, I need you to sit with me for a second here, because this is where things start getting complicated. If you're invested in this story right now, if some part of you needs to know what I said to him, make sure you're subscribed, because trust me, it only gets more intense from here." I told him I didn't need an explanation from a man who was nothing more than a memory to me. I told him our companies could work together without us ever exchanging another personal word. I told myself I meant it. For weeks, I almost did. We were professional, cold, efficient, and then came the late night, a storm outside identical to the one from prom night, like the universe had a cruel sense of humor. When our hands brushed over a contract on my desk, and I pulled away so fast I nearly knocked over my coffee. He noticed. Of course he noticed. He'd always been able to read me like nobody else could, and 7 years hadn't taken that away from him. That was the night Camille Foster reappeared. And what she told me changed everything I thought I understood about why he left. Camille was the woman he'd supposedly been engaged to, the one whose existence had haunted me for 7 years, the reason I told myself he'd simply chosen someone else over me. Except, she told me something I never expected. That engagement had ended years ago, almost as soon as it began. I sat with that for a long time, because if the engagement wasn't the reason he left, then what was? I wasn't ready for the answer, and an elevator getting stuck between the 14th and 15th floors of my own building was not where I expected to almost find out. I'm not going to pretend this part doesn't still make my chest tight to think about. Stuck. Just the two of us. Emergency lighting turning everything gold and strange. He stood close enough that I could feel the heat off his skin, and for one unbearable, breathless second, I thought he was finally going to kiss me. I thought I was finally going to let him. Then the doors opened. Sebastian Cross was standing there, smiling like he'd planned the whole malfunction himself. Which, as it turned out later, he might as well have. Sebastian planted one sentence in my head that day that made me doubt everything Xander had told me. And I believed it. God help me, I believed it completely. I want to stop the story again, just for a second. Because right here is where I made the biggest mistake of my adult life. Bigger, honestly, than anything that happened when I was 18. Before I tell you what I did, tell me in the comments, do you think you'd have trusted him at this point? Or would you have believed the worst, the way I did? I confronted him in his own office, furious, certain he was only back in my life to take what was left of my father's company. I said things I regretted the moment they left my mouth. I told him he was exactly the boy who left me standing in a gymnasium in a dress he'd chosen himself. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked at me and said, "You want to know why I left? Then stop running long enough to let me tell you. I don't fully know which one of us moved first. I just know that 30 seconds later, I wasn't angry anymore, or I was, but it didn't matter, because his hand was in my hair, and mine was fisted in his jacket, and for the first time in 7 years, I stopped thinking entirely. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't perfect. It tasted like 7 years of everything we never said. I wish I could tell you that kiss fixed everything. It didn't. Sebastian Cross made sure of that. Within a week, a document surfaced, forged, though I didn't know it yet, suggesting Xander had orchestrated the entire merger just to seize control of my father's company. Every insecurity I'd buried for 7 years came roaring back at once. He hadn't come back for me. He'd come back to finish what he started when he left. I canceled the merger in front of the entire board. I humiliated him the way I'd once been humiliated, and some small, ugly part of me told myself it was justice. My father, weak but present, pulled me aside after that meeting and told me something he'd been hiding for 17 years. Something that would explain every cold, distant look he'd ever given me. He told me he never blamed me for my mother's death. Not once, not for a single day. He said he couldn't look at me without seeing her. Her eyes, her smile, everything he'd lost. And that his silence had never been about anger. It had been about grief he never learned how to survive. I'd spent 17 years believing I was the reason my father couldn't love me out loud. I'd spent 7 more believing love always leaves. And in one conversation, my father finally gave me back a piece of myself I didn't know I was missing. But I still had to face the fact that I'd just publicly destroyed the only man who'd ever made me feel like I deserved to be loved at all. And I had no idea if it was too late to fix it. We're getting close to the end now, and I promise you, it's worth the wait. If this story has you feeling something right now, let me know in the comments. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you catch the ending live with everyone else. It was Xander's assistant. No, it was Theo, my own closest advisor, who found the proof. Bank records. A whistleblower inside Sebastian's own company. Evidence that the document had been forged from the very beginning to turn me against the one person Sebastian Cross needed me to distrust. Xander found me before I signed the final papers handing everything over to Cross out of nothing but spite and fear. He stood in front of the entire board, the same board that had once watched me cancel our merger, and told the truth I'd waited 7 years to hear. He told them about his father's company collapsing when he was 17, about being sent away, pressured into an engagement he never wanted, cut off from every phone, every letter, every way he had of reaching me. He told them he'd spent 7 years trying to become someone worthy of coming back to. He wasn't looking at the board when he said the last part. He was looking at me. I finally understood the truth. He hadn't left because he stopped loving me. He'd left because he was never given a choice. And now I had to decide if I was brave enough to choose him back. I stood up in front of that entire boardroom, the same room where this whole story started, where my hand had trembled the first time I heard his voice again. And for once in my life, I didn't try to hide it. I told him I'd torn a silver dress apart the night he left. I told him it took me 7 years to understand that what I'd really torn apart was any hope of letting someone in again. And then I told him I was done being afraid of that. Sebastian Cross was exposed, removed from the deal, and out of both of our lives by the end of that week. Some victories are quiet like that, less dramatic than you'd expect, once the truth finally comes out. A year later, Xander and I run our companies together, as equals, not the acting CEO covering for her father, not the boy trying to prove himself, just 2 people who finally stopped running from each other. My father is healthier now. He tells me he loves me out loud, which still catches me off guard every time, in the best way. Maggie cries at literally everything, which honestly, I've started doing too. And a few weeks ago, I wore silver again. Not torn this time. Whole. I used to think I made a promise, that night in my bedroom, to never let anyone see me shake again. I understand it differently now. I didn't need to stop shaking. I just needed someone worth shaking for. If you made it all the way to the end of this one with me, thank you. Genuinely. Tell me in the comments what part of this story hit you the hardest, and let me know if you want more stories like this one. Your comments are honestly what keep this channel going, so don't be shy. And if you haven't yet, subscribe, so you're here for the next one. I promise it's already just as messy as this. I'll see you in the next story.